Welcome students. In this new semester, that is fifth semester, we are going to study a very interesting programming subject, that is .NET technology. Basically, .NET technology's subject code is MCA 504. I would just like to give you an overview of basically what this unit 1 in .NET technology is all about. So the unit 1 in MCA 504, that is .NET technology, is basically focusing on the introduction part of the .NET technology. So the heading for the unit 1 is introduction to .NET technology. Now today is our first lecture. So in this particular first lecture, I would like to tell you about the .NET framework, how the framework works in the .NET, or how the architecture performs in the .NET. So basically, what is the framework, or we can say architecture of .NET is, that we'll discuss in this particular lecture. And it will comprise of we can say the first part of the framework explanation, where we will study major component of the .NET framework in this particular first part. So let us begin. Now the contents which we are going to cover in this lecture is first is introduction to the .NET framework, and then we will go ahead with the topic 1, that is .NET framework architecture. Then we will move on to the next topic, that is the .NET components. Means after studying architecture, we'll just study the components which are present in the architecture, and then we'll go for the topic number 3, that is the common language runtime, which is an integral part of this particular architecture, .NET architecture. And afterwards we'll see the learning outcomes, then research scope, whatever may be the research scope is there for the .NET technology, that we'll see here, and then we'll see the references. So let us begin. First of all, what is Microsoft .NET framework? Actually, .NET framework is basically a platform. It's a software development platform which was developed by Microsoft. So Microsoft can be said as the originator or the inventor of this particular software development platform, that is the .NET framework. This .NET framework was basically meant to create certain applications which would run on the Windows platform. So this framework was developed, we can say, for creating such software applications which are actually able to run on the Windows platform. So the Windows platform compatible applications, we can say that they are built upon the .NET architecture, or we can say that they may be built upon the .NET architecture, but the .NET applications generally they are actually able to run on the Windows platform only. It's a we can say a general concept of this particular software applications which are developed on the .NET framework. The first version of the .NET framework was released in the year 2002. So the very first version, if we talk about the .NET framework version, then it was released in the year 2002. And it's a software development platform which is developed by the Microsoft. The version was called .NET Framework 1.0. So basically, the framework which was released in 2002 was a version, and its name was .NET Framework 1.0. The .NET Framework has come a long way since then, and the current version is 4.7.1, or also means the future scope is for .NET means 5 version also is being, the research is going on. So we can say that .NET Framework has gone through several evolution processes, and from then till now .NET has shown many improvements in its various applications. .NET framework can be used to create both type of applications, that is form based applications as well as web based applications. So if we talk about the applications which are developed or which can be developed using the .NET framework are of two types, that is form based and web based applications. Now web services can also be developed using the .NET framework. So we can say that multiple applications are there which can be built upon using the .NET framework. The framework also supports various programming languages such as VB and C#. So the C# .NET, VB .NET, these are the various programming languages which this .NET framework supports. So developers can choose and select the language to develop the required application. So it's up to the developers or the who are actually developing the software applications. They can choose whatever may be the we can say the language they want to develop any particular required software application. So since various programming languages are supported by the .NET framework. Now if we see the architecture of .NET framework, then here is the diagram. It's the diagrammatic representation of the .NET framework architecture, and here one by one we will see all the levels which are present in this .NET framework architecture. Meanwhile, looking at the first layer of the .NET framework architecture, it seems as if n numbers of languages are being supported by the .NET. So hence it is written here also that .NET supports about 70 plus languages, and the basic we can say components of the .NET framework architecture that we will study in our forthcoming slides. Meanwhile, this is the overall whole framework architecture of .NET, and this is only actually followed for developing several software applications which are built upon the .NET technology. Now we'll just discuss about the various components of the .NET. Now already we have gone through this particular architecture. We'll just recall some names over here, like common language runtime is there, then base class library is there, ADO.NET data and XML is there, ASP.NET Windows forms are there, then CLS or common language specification is there, and n numbers of different languages which are supported by the .NET framework architecture are there. So we can say it's not a single language. .NET is not a single language, it's a whole platform, or we can say framework. It's a whole framework. It's not a language only. It's not like Java is only a programming language. If we call Java, it's a programming language, but we cannot call .NET as a programming language only. Rather, it is a framework in whole. Okay, it's a total framework architecture basically, and in this framework, several languages or several languages actually are supported by this particular framework. So now we are going to discuss about the key components of the .NET framework. So actually looking at this particular architecture, first thing comes in our mind that what are the major components which actually play a role in executing and final we can say execution of several software applications. So let us move ahead. .NET components. The architecture of the .NET framework is based on the following key components. Actually there are two major components of the .NET framework which we can see here easily, that is common language runtime, and the second one is the .NET framework class library. This is the, we can say, the class library or the base class library, or the, it's also called as .NET framework class library. So and CLR, if we talk about CLR, that is common language runtime, what it is called as, it's a very famous definition for common language runtime, that is, it is the execution engine that handles running applications. So whatever may be the applications which are run, that are basically run using the we can say the common language runtime, or the, we can say, the CLR. So basically we can say that CLR is the one which is called as the execution engine of the .NET framework, and it basically helps to manage, or we can say handle, several running applications. So basically CLR is called as the execution engine. So we can say that basically .NET supports several window based as well as web based applications that we have already seen earlier, that several window based as well as web based applications can be developed on this particular platform. And how the applications can be developed using the components which are actually present in this particular architecture, that is the CLR and the base class library, or we can say the framework class library of the .NET framework. And CLR is nothing but the execution engine. It's a very important integral part, we can say, of the framework architecture, and CLR is the execution engine that handles running applications. Now if we talk about the four main components of the .NET framework, what are these? Basically there are four main components which are considered generally. If we talk about the .NET framework, then it's not that only two components are talked about, although two components which we discussed earlier are the integral part of the .NET framework. Still, along with them, some more components are there which are equally important for the .NET framework. So if you talk about the CLR, Common Language Runtime, we have already seen this. It's a virtual machine component of the Microsoft's .NET framework. It manages the execution of the .NET programs. So CLR can be compared with the any particular, we can say, like for example Java virtual machine is there in Java. Likewise this is CLR in .NET. So it is a machine component of the Microsoft's .NET framework which is responsible for the managing of the execution of .NET programs. So whatever may be the .NET programs, if they need to execute, then the managing of those programs execution is done using the help of this Common Language Runtime component, and it is a virtual machine component of the Microsoft's .NET framework. Next we'll talk about the CTS, that is Common Type System. In Microsoft's .NET framework, the CTS is what? It's a standard. We can say CTS is basically a standard, or we can say it's a specification that specifies how the type definitions and the specific values of the types are represented in computer memory. See, as we have seen in the architecture that .NET supports several languages. Here it is written also that .NET supports about 70 plus languages. Now, making it run, or different languages, making different languages to run on a single common .NET platform, there is obviously some we can say measure should be there, so that if we are using one language on a framework and it is using some different data types, and again second time we are using some different language on the same framework and it is using some different data type, so the data type difference can be observed in different languages which are present or which are used in the .NET framework. Like suppose here I have written that it is using VB, C#, JScript, J#, C++. Also C++ can also be made to be executed, or we can say to be run on the Microsoft Visual Studio platform, as well as VB.NET, C#.NET, JScript, J#, and numbers of 70 plus. Here it's written 70 plus languages. Now see, every we can say language is using different data types. Here C++ integer takes different data type, C# takes different data type, C# takes 4 bytes for the integer, whereas C++ it's taking 2 bytes. So this kind of interoperability, how it will be made common on a single common platform, if they are being used on a single architecture, then there should be some standard, there should be some rules, regulations specified already that actually define that or allow these different data types to be used and on this particular common framework or common platform. So if we want to use different languages, there are different data types on a certain common platform, then this is going to help us out. That is the specification which has already been defined in the Microsoft's .NET framework architecture. It's called as CTS. It's a standard, and it specifies how the type definitions and the specific values of the types will be represented in the computer memory, so that there may be no conflict that one language is using some different data type, other language is using some different data type. In the memory there may be a conflict, but due to the presence of this particular standard specification already present in this architecture, this conflict will not come. So that is why, for that purpose, means to avoid the conflicts and to make the different languages working on different data types to be run or executed on the common framework platform, this CTS has already incorporated in this architecture. Next we'll discuss about the base class library. Now it's a very important component. Base class library is what? It's a collection of various classes from the .NET framework, from which all the base classes like system.object, system.collection, etc. Can be written in the program. So base classes like system.object, system.collection, these are the base classes. So basically it's we can say a core part of this .NET framework architecture, base class library. All the libraries, class libraries which we want to use in our programs, those libraries can be used in our programs because they are already present in a certain base class library. Right, like suppose in C++ we use several header files, in Java we import several packages, right? So similarly here, to provide different functionalities to our program, different programs, there must be some class libraries which can be linked with the program, so that the program is able to work on a specific type of application. So for that purpose, what is provided in this architecture? It's a base class library. It's a core part of this .NET framework architecture, we can say, right? So basically we can say it's a collection of various classes from the .NET framework. We can say it's a collection of classes. That's why it's called as a class library, and numbers of classes can be there, like some base classes example is given over here: system.object, system.collection, etc. Next key component is common language specification. As we have already discussed this, it is the part of the specifications of the .NET framework, and it basically defines a subset of the common type system. CLS basically defines a subset of the common type system, and they actually ensure that is CTS and CLS. Already we have studied about this CTS, common type system. So basically CLS, we can say it defines the subset of the common type system, and it ensures language interoperability. As we have discussed earlier, that already 70 plus languages can be made to be executed on the .NET framework platform. So that is why these two key components, that is CLS and CTS, are actually responsible for ensuring this language interoperability. Now in this particular lecture we are going to study in detail the very first component of this particular framework architecture, that is common language runtime. So let us begin with the common language runtime. Now common language runtime, or we can say it's also called as common language, we can call it as a common language infrastructure, or rather we can say. So it is it's a platform on which the .NET programs are executed. Whatever may be the programs which are executed, those are made to be executed on the common language infrastructure. Next, CLI has the following key features. We can call it as CLI also because it's providing an infrastructure for running different .NET programs written in different languages. So the key features which this particular runtime engine provides us: exception handling. It's a key feature. Exceptions are errors. What are exceptions? It's are errors which occur when the application is executed, and some we can say means, for example, an exception example can be like if an application tries to open a file on the local machine but the file is not present. So if you try to if any particular application is trying to open a certain particular file on a local machine, and if that application doesn't find that file, then exception error we can say occurs, and it is notified on the screen that a certain exception has occurred. So it's a kind of error only. If the application tries to fetch some records from the database but the connection to the database is not valid, right? Suppose if you want to retrieve or some we want to access certain particular record from a database, and that database connectivity has means we can say that it's already been lost. It's now the database connectivity with the application is not present, and still if the application tries to fetch certain records from the database, then since the connection is not existing between the application and database, then connection will not be valid. This kind of exception error will be notified on the screen. So we can say that exception handling is the major responsibility of this common language runtime, the very key component of the key responsibility which it performs, that is common language runtime. It's the execution engine of the .NET framework. Next is the garbage collection. Garbage collection is the process of what? Removing unwanted resources when they are no longer required. So generally, what can be the garbage collection examples? Like a file handle is there which is no longer required. If the application has finished all the operations on the file, then the file handle may no longer be required. Generally, we can say that a file handle is there, and when an application finishes certain operations to be done on a certain file, then in that case, then the file handle will not be required. It will not be required in the future. So the database connection is no longer required. And now, if the application has finished all the operations on a database, then the database connection may no longer be required. So generally, all the these three different types of we can say examples are there, which can be called as the examples of garbage collection, where actually certain database connections which are no longer required, but still there's some identification, or we can say some information regarding that database connection is still available on the we can say system. So collection of such kind of database connection which is no longer required, and if the application has finished operations on the file, then the file handle will not be required. So, and also if the application is finished doing all its operations on the database, then also the database connection will no longer be required. So such kind of database connections, file handle, etc. can come into the category of the garbage. So garbage collection is basically those we can say, like for example database connections, etc., which are not required but still they are present on the system's memory. CLR is basically responsible for collecting those we can say means the garbage collection is actually performed by the CLR. So basically what it does, it we can say that freeing up the space which is no longer now being required, and making the different new variables which require the space, that will be made available by the CLR. So this garbage collection will definitely help out the new programs and the new variables because the space will be freed up, and this particular garbage collection is mainly done to free up the space and to avail the memory space to the new variables in the coming application. So this was all about this, and so we can say that it's a major responsibility which it performs, that is exception handling and garbage collection. And here it basically removes the unwanted resources like database connections, file handle, etc., which are no longer required, and their space which is freed up, that will be given to the different variables which can be which may require space in the future programs. Common language runtime. Here we can say that a developer can develop an application in a variety of .NET programming languages. First is the language. The first level is the programming language itself. The most common ones are VB.NET and C#. So if we talk about the CLR, application development can be done using three main things like language, compiler, and common language interpreter. So the first language is the programming language itself. It's the most common ones which are used are VB.NET, C#.NET. Compiler, there is a compiler which will be separate for each programming language. Now there is a key feature of this particular .NET framework CLR, that every language has a different compiler present here. So there is a compiler which will be separate for each programming language. So underlying the VB.NET language, there will be a separate VB.NET compiler. So from this particular point we get that for every language which is being used, for every programming language which is being used, here the VB.NET language or like C#.NET, every different compiler will be present for here. Next is the common language interpreter. This is the final layer in the .NET which would be used to run a .NET program developed in any programming language. So the subsequent compiler will send the program to the CLI layer to run the .NET application. So basically common language interpreter is one which is the final layer in the .NET, and we can say it is responsible to run a .NET program developed in any particular programming language, whether it is in VB.NET or in C#.NET. It's so the subsequent compiler will do what? It will send the program to the CLI layer to run the .NET application. So compiler, after doing its job, it will forward the program to the CLI layer. Now this is the common language interpreter, where we can see that very easily that VB.NET is having its separate compiler present, and C#.NET it's having a separate compiler present, C# compiler, and finally it will be handed over to the common language interpreter for finally execution of the program. These are the student effective learning outcomes after studying all these lecture slides. I hope students you must have developed an ability to observe and develop sense making. Logical skills must have been developed for abstract concepts. I hope that you must be able to do or achieve critical and innovative thinking skills after learning this .NET framework architecture, and I hope you must have you must have adapted certain thinking skills regarding this .NET framework technology. Now the research scope, if we talk about the .NET, we can say that it will be more comprehensive in manufacturing native, or we can say, or cross-platform web applications while using HTML5 or JavaScript or CSS. So we can say that research is still ongoing for the .NET technology, and it will be more comprehensive in the manufacturing native or cross-platform web applications where actually HTML5 or JavaScript or CSS are used. Website developers can create more responsive Azure Microsoft services and Azure enabled applications. Microsoft Azure basically is a platform, and website developers can create more responsive we can say enabled Azure Microsoft services of enabled applications. Moreover, SharePoint, SQL Server and cloud based applications with faster performance. So these are the applications which can be built upon using the .NET technology, where actually the research needs more attention and more research is need to be done in these fields, where actually the website developers can create more responsive Azure microservices and Azure enabled applications. Also there are certain technologies like SQL Server, SharePoint, cloud based applications with faster performance. So these are the research areas which should be focused upon for the .NET applications. This article incorporates text and diagrams included from the references which I have taken from the below references. Thank you.